The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest structure ever built by any living species. It floated at the center of known space, a station so massive that entire moons could fit inside its walls. Thousands of alien representatives sat in rows that curved upward like the inside of a shell, and every seat was filled. The air smelled different depending on which section you stood in, because each species needed its own atmosphere to breathe. Pipes and vents worked endlessly to keep everyone alive in the same room. Today, the chamber was louder than usual. Something big was happening, and everyone knew it. Warlord Drenax of the Velkari Dominion stood at the central podium. He was tall, even by Velkari standards, with dark armored skin and 4 eyes that glowed a dull orange. His voice was deep and filled the chamber without effort. He did not need a microphone. His species had evolved to command. The humans, he said, letting the word hang in the air like something disgusting, have refused us. We requested military passage through their system. A simple corridor, a small thing, and they said no. Murmurs spread across the chamber. Most of the representatives had never even met a human. Earth was a small planet on the edge of the galaxy. Humans had joined the galactic community only 32 years ago, and in that time they had done nothing remarkable. They traded a little, they kept to themselves. They were considered primitive, emotional, and unimportant. Drenax continued, "The Sol system sits on a critical hyperspace lane. Whoever controls that lane controls trade across the entire outer rim. I am not asking this council to go to war. I am asking this council to step aside and allow the Velkari Dominion to correct a minor problem." Ambassador Lorith, the eldest member of the council, leaned forward in his seat. He was ancient, his pale blue skin loose and lined with centuries of age. He had watched empires rise and crumble. He had seen wars that burned entire star systems to ash. And something about this moment made him uneasy. "Warlord Drenax," Lorith said slowly, "do you understand what you are asking? You are requesting permission to invade a sovereign world." Drenax smiled, at least the Velkari version of a smile. His lower jaw split slightly, showing rows of black teeth. "Invade is a strong word, Ambassador. I prefer to call it a correction. Earth has no real fleet. Their territory is a single star system. My 8th Armada alone carries 9,000 warships. This will not be a war. It will be a footnote." He looked down at his hands and felt something cold settle in his chest. Then, Councillor Fen stood up. Fen was not an impressive figure. He was short, soft-spoken, and belonged to a neutral species that had no military and no enemies. But Fen was a scholar. He studied civilizations the way a doctor studied diseases, and he had spent the last 11 years studying one species in particular. "I must object," Fen said. His voice was thin but steady. "The Council is making a terrible mistake." Drenax turned to him with open contempt. "And what would a species that has never fought a single war know about mistakes on the battlefield?" Fen did not flinch. He activated the central display and projected a file onto the massive screen above the chamber. It was marked with the highest level of classification the Council had. "This is the original survey of Earth," Fen said, "conducted when humans first made contact with the galactic community. I had to file 9 separate requests to access this document. Most of you have never seen it." The file opened. Data scrolled across the screen. Images appeared. Battlefields, mushroom clouds, cities reduced to rubble, soldiers charging through mud and fire, ships sinking in black water. And then, after every disaster, images of humans rebuilding, standing up, starting again. "Humans are the only known species in this galaxy," Fen said quietly. that has used weapons of mass destruction on themselves and continued to exist. They did not destroy themselves. They did not collapse. They kept going. They fought 2 global wars, invented nuclear weapons, pointed those weapons at each other for 50 years, and somehow survived. The chamber was quiet now. Fen looked directly at Drenax. The original survey team recommended that Earth be classified as a death world. The dominant species was flagged as extinction class. That means, if provoked, they are capable of destroying not just themselves, but anything that threatens them. That classification was buried and overridden for political reasons. But the data is still here. Drenax stared at Fen for a long moment, then laughed. It was a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. You are afraid of a species that nearly killed itself? That is exactly why they are weak. They are animals. Clever animals, perhaps, but animals all the same. The council voted. It was not even close. Most species did not care about humans. Some actively wanted them humbled. A few simply wanted access to the hyperspace lane and were happy to let the Velkari do the dirty work. The motion passed. The Velkari Dominion was given clearance to resolve what the official record called the human question. Fen sat down slowly. He had done everything he could, and it had not been enough. Drenax turned to General Thovak, who stood waiting in the shadows behind the podium. Thovak was a veteran of 40 planetary conquests. He had never lost. Mobilize the 8th Armada, Drenax said. Thovak bowed his head and left the chamber without a word. 12,000 light-years away, on a small blue planet orbiting a quiet yellow star, a transmission arrived. It was a Velkari ultimatum demanding the complete and unconditional surrender of Earth within 10 standard rotations. The message was received in a war room buried deep beneath the mountains of Korea. Admiral Han Do-hyun read it once, standing perfectly still. He was not a large man. He was lean, calm, and had a face that gave away nothing. His officers called him the Shepherd, because he always brought his people home. He looked around the room at the officers who had gathered in silence. Their faces were tight. Some were scared. None of them spoke. Do-hyun's voice was quiet and steady. Wake everyone up. And deep beneath the surface of the Earth, lights began to turn on. 10 days. That was how long Earth had before the Velkari 8th Armada would arrive. 10 days to prepare for 9,000 warships, crewed by a species that had conquered 40 worlds without ever losing a single campaign. Secretary General Park Ji-suk stood in front of the United Earth Coalition's emergency assembly. The room was underground, deep enough that the walls were warm from the planet's core. Every major leader on Earth was present, either in person or through secure holographic links. Their faces were grim. Ji-suk was a tall man with gray hair and a scar that ran along the left side of his jaw. He had been a soldier before he became a politician, and he still carried a sidearm under his suit. He had never taken it off. Not once in 20 years. People used to laugh about it. Nobody was laughing now. I am not going to lie to you, Ji-suk said. His voice was flat and hard. By every galactic projection, Earth falls in 72 hours after first contact with the Velkari fleet. We have 340 ships. They have over 9,000. The math is simple. The math says we lose. He paused, then he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the kind of smile a wolf makes before it bites. But galactic projections have never accounted for the way humans fight. He stepped aside, and Admiral Han Do-hyun took the podium. Do-hyun brought up a three-dimensional map of the Sol system. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid belt glowed in soft blue light. The defense plan is called Operation Chrysanthemum, Do-hyun said. We will not meet the Velkari in open space. That is what they expect. That is how every other species has fought them, and that is why every other species has lost. He pointed to the outer edges of the system. We have spent the last 6 years seeding the Sol system with hidden defenses. Minefields disguised as ice and rock near Neptune. Automated weapons platforms hidden inside the rings of Jupiter and Saturn. Drone swarms stored in hollowed-out asteroids throughout the belt. None of this appears on any galactic survey. None of this was reported to the Council. The room was silent. Some of the leaders looked shocked. They had not known about any of this. Dohyun continued calmly. We will let the enemy come to us. We will let them push deep into our system, and then we will close the door behind them. In a separate briefing room, Yoon Nari stood in front of a wall of screens. She was the chief tactical officer aboard the flagship Baiko, and she was considered the fastest combat analyst in the entire fleet. She was young, sharp-faced, and had a habit of speaking to senior officers as if they were slow children. Nobody corrected her because she was always right. Our sensor grid has been active for 4 years, Nari told her tactical teams. Every satellite the galaxy thinks is a civilian communication relay is actually a deep space scanner. We have mapped every possible approach vector the Velkari can use to enter our system. I have personally calculated over 14,000 engagement scenarios. She tapped the screen. Red lines appeared, showing predicted Velkari fleet movements. Blue dots showed human positions hidden throughout the system. Their formation will break apart when they hit the minefields. They will scatter when the drones hit them. And when they scatter, we strike. She looked at her team. The key to this entire plan is patience. We let them think they are winning. We let them get comfortable. And then we kill them. Meanwhile, far below the surface of the Earth, in a laboratory that did not officially exist, Kwon Sujin worked in silence. She was the lead scientist of Earth's Experimental Weapons Division. She was a small woman with dark circles under her eyes and hands that never stopped moving. She had not slept more than 4 hours a night in 6 years. The weapon in front of her was enormous. It filled the entire chamber, a long barrel of dark metal surrounded by rings of energy that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. It was a gravity lance. When fired, it would collapse a pocket of space-time around its target. Anything caught inside would be crushed into a point of infinite density. The target would not explode. It would simply stop existing. The Galactic Council had banned this type of weapon for all species. Sujin had built 3 of them anyway. Admiral Dohyun visited her that evening. He stood in the doorway of the lab and looked at the weapon for a long time. Is it ready? He asked. Sujin did not look up from her work. It has been ready for 6 years. I just hoped we would never need it. Dohyun nodded slowly. I hoped so too. Above the Earth, in the Seoul Orbital Station, Captain Bae Taewon walked through the corridors of his ship, the destroyer Iron Crane. He was the youngest captain in the fleet, 29 years old, with a round face and steady hands. His crew was young too. Most of them had never seen real combat. He gathered them in the main hold. They looked up at him with wide eyes. Some were scared. Some were trying very hard not to look scared. Taewon did not give them a speech about glory. He did not promise them victory. He stood there, hands behind his back, and spoke simply. I am not going to tell you that everything will be fine. I do not know if it will. But I will tell you this. Whatever happens in 10 days, the enemy will remember us. They will remember this ship. They will remember every single one of you. And 1,000 years from now, when other species talk about what happened in this system, they will say that the crew of the Iron Crane did not run. The hold was quiet. Then, one by one, his crew straightened their backs. 12,000 light-years away, Counselor Fen sat alone in his quarters. He had pulled up the original Earth survey file again. He scrolled to the very last page, to the note the survey team had written after spending 3 months observing humans from orbit. The note read, "Recommend classification, Death World. Dominant species exhibits extreme adaptability, aggression, endurance, and pack-bonding behavior. Species has survived multiple extinction-level events through cooperation and violence in equal measure. Threat level if provoked, extinction class. Do not engage, do not provoke, do not underestimate." Fen sent one final message to Warlord Drenax, a warning, a plea. He begged him to call off the invasion. The message was marked as read. There was no reply. Fen closed his eyes and whispered to the empty room, "They have no idea what is waiting for them." On Earth, the last preparations were completed in silence. Ships powered up, weapons were loaded, soldiers said goodbye to their families without telling them why. And in the war room beneath the mountains, Admiral Dohyun sat alone, staring at a photograph of his daughter. He folded it carefully, placed it in his breast pocket, and stood up. The Valkyrie 8th Armada dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system like a dark cloud rolling over a quiet field. 9,400 warships stretched across the void, in perfect formation. Cruisers, destroyers, carriers, dreadnoughts, and at the center of it all, the command ship Fist of Dominion, where General Thovok stood on his bridge and looked out at the small yellow star in the distance. He had conquered 40 worlds. He had broken species that had fought for centuries. He had never once felt doubt before a battle, and he did not feel it now. "Scan the system," Thovok ordered. His sensor officers ran a full sweep. The results came back in moments. "No fleet detected, General. No orbital defenses. No military transmissions. The system appears to be undefended." Thovok's 4 eyes narrowed slightly. He had expected at least a token force, a few hundred ships lined up to be destroyed. Some desperate broadcast, begging for mercy. But there was nothing. Just silence. "They are hiding," Thovok muttered. "Cowards. All formations advance. Standard conquest pattern. We push straight for the 3rd planet." The Armada moved forward. Thousands of engines burned bright against the black of space. The formation was textbook. The Valkyrie had been conquering worlds for longer than humans had been building cities, and their military doctrine was considered perfect by galactic standards. They passed the orbit of the outermost planets without incident. Thovok allowed himself a thin smile. Perhaps this would be even easier than he had thought. Then they reached Neptune. The first explosion came without warning. A chunk of ice, the size of a small building, suddenly detonated against the hull of a Valkyrie cruiser. Then another. Then 100 more. The space around Neptune lit up like a field of burning stars as hidden mines, disguised as natural debris and seeded years ago by human engineers, activated all at once. 312 Valkyrie ships were destroyed in the first 60 seconds. Fireballs bloomed silently in the vacuum. Wreckage spun outward in expanding clouds of metal and fire. Thovok gripped the railing of his bridge. "Mines," he snarled. "Primitive tricks. All ships, activate countermeasures and push through. Do not stop." The Armada pushed forward, but the damage had been done. The perfect formation had cracked. Ships were spreading apart to avoid debris, and gaps were opening in the fleet's defensive structure. They reached Jupiter 3 hours later. The rings of the giant planet had always looked beautiful in galactic surveys. Soft bands of dust and ice circling a massive world. But, as the Valkyrie fleet passed through Jupiter's orbit, the rings came alive. Weapons platforms that had been hidden inside the ring debris for years powered up simultaneously. Hundreds of them. They opened fire with concentrated energy beams that cut through Valkyrie shields like hot metal through paper. At the same time, asteroid hangars throughout the belt cracked open and released drone swarms. Not thousands, millions. Tiny, cheap, expendable machines that flooded the space around the Valkyrie fleet like a swarm of insects. The drones did not carry heavy weapons. They did not need to. They slammed into sensor arrays, blinding ships. They latched onto engine ports and detonated, crippling propulsion. They rammed shield generators by the dozen until the generators overloaded and failed. Individually, each drone was nothing. Together, they were a nightmare. Thovak watched his tactical display turn red. Ships were breaking formation everywhere, spinning and firing wildly at targets too small and too fast to track. Officers were shouting over each other on every communication channel. The elegant Valkyrie war machine was falling apart. "Get them off us!" Thovak roared. "Regroup! All capital ships, regroup!" But the fleet could not regroup. The drones were everywhere, filling every gap, clogging every sensor. The Valkyrie were swatting at shadows. And that was exactly what Nari had been waiting for. Aboard the flagship Baiko, hidden behind the shadow of Mars along with the rest of Earth's fleet, Nari watched her screens with calm, focused eyes. 340 human warships sat in perfect silence, engines cold, weapons charged, waiting. She turned to Admiral Dahyun. "Their formation is broken. Capital ships are separated from their escorts. 63% of their sensor network is offline. This is the moment." Dahyun did not hesitate. "All ships, attack." The human fleet exploded out from behind Mars, like a pack of wolves breaking from a tree line. They hit the scattered Valkyrie formation from the side, driving into the gaps the drones had created. Human ships were smaller, faster, and crewed by people who knew they were fighting for their home. The battle became a close-range brawl. Human captains flew their ships into knife-fight distances that no galactic military doctrine recommended. They fired everything they had, reloaded, and fired again. When weapons overheated, engineers manually bypassed safety systems to keep them firing. When shields failed, crews rerouted power from life support to keep the guns running. They fought in freezing corridors with no air, and they did not stop. Captain Bei Taewon pushed the iron crane straight into the heart of a Valkyrie dreadnought group. The destroyer was outgunned and outmassed by a factor of 10. It did not matter. Taewon flew his ship directly into the open hangar bay of the largest Valkyrie dreadnought, a ship 3 times the iron crane's size. "All hands, abandon ship," Taewon ordered calmly. "Get to the escape pods. You have 40 seconds. His crew ran. Taewon stayed at the controls. He locked the iron crane's reactor into a deliberate overload, aiming the ship deeper into the dreadnought's belly. The reactor warning screamed. Taewon reached for the ejection handle above his seat. He opened a channel to the fleet. His voice was steady. "Tell my mother I said it was worth it." He pulled the handle. His command pod launched clear of the ship half a second before the iron crane's reactor detonated inside the dreadnought. The explosion tore the massive Valkyrie warship in half from the inside. 2 nearby cruisers were caught in the blast and spun away, burning. Taewon's pod tumbled through the wreckage. He was alive. But alive. By the time the first engagement ended, the numbers told a story that the galaxy had never seen before. The Valkyrie had lost over 2,000 ships. Earth had lost 95. The most powerful armada in the Valkyrie Dominion's history had been mauled by a species that they had expected to surrender on sight. General Thovak stood on his bridge, surrounded by damage reports and the sound of alarms. For the first time in his entire career, he felt something he had never felt before. Doubt. Real, cold, bone-deep doubt. These creatures were not what he had been told. They were not primitive. They were not weak. They fought like nothing he had ever seen. They did not retreat when they were losing. They did not surrender when their ships were destroyed. They rammed their own burning ships into his fleet. They flew into certain death and smiled while doing it. What kind of species does that? 12,000 light-years away, in the grand chamber of the Galactic Council, live feeds of the battle were being broadcast on the central display. The chamber was completely silent. Thousands of representatives from hundreds of species watched as tiny human ships tore into the Valkyrie Armada with a ferocity that defied every model, every simulation, every prediction. Ambassador Lorith stared at the screen. His old hands were shaking. He whispered, "What have we allowed?" Councillor Fenn stood slowly from his seat. He looked around the chamber at the faces of every species that had voted to let this happen. His voice shook, but his words were sharp. "You gave them permission to attack a Deathworld species. Every ship they lose is a consequence of your vote. Remember that." Nobody spoke. On the screen, human ships burned and fought and died and kept coming. And the galaxy watched in silence. General Thovak was not a fool. He was wounded, yes. Shaken, yes. But he was still a conqueror, and conquerors do not stop because of a bloody nose. He pulled his remaining ships together. 6,800 warships, still more than enough to destroy every human vessel 10 times over. He reorganized his formations, pushed his damaged ships to the back, and gave a single order. Straight to Earth. Forget the fleet. Forget the traps. We burn the planet. Nothing else matters. The Valkyrie Armada drove inward through the Sol system, like a wounded animal charging at the thing that had hurt it. Thovak no longer cared about elegance or doctrine. He wanted the blue planet reduced to glass and ash. He wanted to watch it burn. Human ships harassed the Valkyrie the entire way. Small groups of destroyers and frigates would appear from behind moons and asteroids, fire everything they had, and disappear before the Valkyrie could respond. Each attack only killed a handful of ships, but each attack also slowed the Armada down and frayed the nerves of crews that were already afraid. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, like ghosts. Admiral Dohyun watched the Valkyrie advance from the bridge of the Baiko. His fleet had taken heavy losses in the first engagement. He had 245 ships left. His people were tired, wounded, running low on ammunition. But his face showed nothing. It never did. "They are heading straight for Earth," Yun-Nari reported from her station. Her voice was calm, but her hands were moving fast across her controls. Estimated arrival at Earth orbit in 6 hours. They have begun charging orbital bombardment weapons. Orbital bombardment. The words hung in the air like poison. It meant Thovak intended to fire on the planet itself, on cities, on homes, on billions of people who had no ships and no weapons. It was a war crime by galactic law, but Thovak had clearly stopped caring about galactic law. Dohyun nodded slowly. "Then we moved to stage 3. Nari looked at him. "Are you sure?" "I have been sure since the day we built it." The Valkyrie Armada reached Earth orbit 4 hours ahead of Nari's estimate. Thovak had pushed his engines beyond safe limits, burning out reactors on dozens of ships just to arrive faster. He did not care. He stood on his bridge and stared at the blue and green planet below him. It was beautiful. He hated it. "All capital ships," Thovak said, "target major population centers. Begin bombardment sequence." The Valkyrie dreadnoughts raised their weapons toward the surface of the Earth. Energy built in their barrels, glowing bright enough to be seen from the ground. On the planet below, billions of humans looked up at the sky. They knew what was coming. Then the moon changed. Earth's moon had always been a dead gray rock. Every galactic survey said the same thing. No atmosphere, no resources, no strategic value, just a big, quiet ball of dust and stone orbiting a small planet. Every galactic survey was wrong. The surface of the moon cracked open in dozens of places simultaneously. Massive panels of rock and dust slid apart to reveal what had been hidden underneath for 20 years. Weapons arrays, shield generators, power cores, an entire fortress built into the body of the moon itself, constructed in secret by tens of thousands of engineers who had worked underground for 2 decades and told no one. The lunar weapons fired first. Concentrated beams of energy lanced out from the moon's surface and struck the nearest Valkyrie ships before they could react. Shields meant nothing. The beams punched through Valkyrie armor like needles through cloth. Ships exploded in chains as the lunar batteries swept across the formation with mechanical precision. Then the shield activated. A planetary barrier, projected from the lunar generators, expanded outward and wrapped around the Earth in a shimmering dome of blue-white energy. The Valkyrie bombardment shots that were already in flight struck the shield and vanished. Not deflected, not absorbed, simply erased. The galaxy had believed that humans were incapable of building a planetary shield. The technology was supposed to be beyond them by centuries. The galaxy was wrong about that too. Thovok stared at the shield in disbelief. That is not possible. Then the gravity lances fired. Quan Sujin stood in a control room buried deep inside the moon, her hands steady on the firing controls. She had built these weapons. She had hoped they would never be used. But hope was a luxury that had ended 10 days ago. She pressed the firing sequence. 3 gravity lances, hidden in reinforced bunkers on the lunar surface, discharged simultaneously. Each lance sent out a focused beam that targeted a single point in space, a point occupied by a Valkyrie capital ship. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The targeted ships did not explode. There was no fire, no debris. The beams collapsed a pocket of space-time around each ship, crushing everything inside into a point of infinite density. One moment, the ships were there. The next moment, they were simply gone. Where they had been, there was only a brief shimmer and then nothing. But the damage did not stop with the 3 ships. The gravitational aftershock rippled outward from each collapse point. 1,200 surrounding vessels were caught in the shockwave. Some were torn apart instantly, ripped to pieces by tidal forces that twisted metal like paper. Others were flung outward, their crews crushed by gravity spikes that turned the inside of every ship into a death trap. In a matter of seconds, nearly 1,500 Valkyrie ships were destroyed. The Valkyrie fleet broke. Not retreated, not regrouped, broke. Ships scattered in every direction, abandoning formation, abandoning orders, abandoning everything except the desperate need to get away from whatever had just happened. Thovok screamed orders into his communications array, but nothing happened. Human jamming technology, activated the moment Stage 3 began, had cut every long-range signal in the system. Thovok could not reach his fleet. He could not reach Valkyrie space. He could not call for reinforcements. He could not even call for retreat. The humans had sealed the Sol system shut. The Valkyrie were trapped. Aboard the Baiko, Yunari coordinated the final phase. Her voice was calm, almost bored, as she directed the remaining human ships into a tightening net around the Valkyrie survivors. Every escape route was covered. Every hyperspace jump point was blocked by minefields that had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. "They are running," Nari said, tracking the scattered Valkyrie ships on her display. "No coordination, no formation. They are not an armada anymore." She paused and looked at Do-hyun. "They are prey." Do-hyun stood still for a long moment, then he opened a communication channel, not to his fleet, to General Thovok. The Valkyrie general's face appeared on the screen. He looked like a different creature than the one who had entered the Sol system with such confidence. His eyes were wide. His armored skin was cracked in places from explosions on his own bridge. Behind him, His command deck was filled with smoke and the sound of screaming alarms. Do-hyun spoke quietly. He did not gloat. His voice was the same flat, steady tone he always used. General, you have one chance to surrender your fleet. If you do not, I will ensure that not a single ship returns to Valkyrie space. Your families will never know what happened to you. You will simply disappear. You will become nothing, a mystery, a rumor. This is not a negotiation. Thovok stared at the human on his screen. This small, calm creature, who had just broken the most powerful armada in the Dominion's history. Thovok had conquered 40 worlds. He had never surrendered. He had never even considered it. He considered it now. I surrender, Thovok said. The words tasted like poison. The fighting stopped. Of the original 9,400 Valkyrie warships, only 3,100 survived to lower their weapons. Earth had lost 188 ships, more than half its fleet. Not a single bombardment shot had reached the surface. Not one. In his office on Earth, Secretary General Park Ji-sek watched the surrender through a window display. The sky was clear. Birds were singing outside. Children were playing in a park across the street, completely unaware of how close they had come to dying. Ji-sek poured himself a glass of water. He looked out at the blue sky and the green trees and the ordinary, beautiful world that had just survived the impossible. 32 years in the galactic community, he said quietly, and they still do not know us at all. 3 months passed after the Battle of Sol. 3 months of silence from Earth. 3 months of the galaxy holding its breath, waiting to see what the humans would do next. Every species expected the same thing: retaliation, vengeance, a fleet of human warships jumping into Valkyrie space and burning their worlds the way the Valkyrie had tried to burn Earth. It was what any other species would have done. It was what the galaxy understood. But the humans did nothing. They repaired their ships, they rebuilt their fleet, they buried their dead, and they said nothing. The silence was worse than any threat could have been. Then, on the first day of the 4th month, Earth sent a single message to the Galactic Council. It was short. It said only this: "We are coming to speak." The Grand Chamber was full when the human delegation arrived. Every seat was taken. Species that had not attended a council session in decades had sent representatives. The observation galleries, normally empty, were packed. The entire galaxy wanted to see what the humans would say. The doors of the chamber opened. Secretary General Park Ji-sek walked in first. He wore a simple dark suit. No medals, no ceremonial armor, no symbols of military power. Behind him walked Admiral Han Do-hyun, also in a plain dark uniform, and Yoon Nari, carrying nothing but a small datapad. 3 humans, that was all. No guards, no soldiers, no warships visible outside the station. Just 3 people walking calmly into a room filled with thousands of alien species, many of whom had voted to let them be destroyed. The restraint was the most terrifying thing anyone in the chamber had ever seen. They did not need to show strength. Everyone in that room had watched the battle footage. Everyone knew what Earth was capable of. The fact that the humans walked in, looking like they were attending a business meeting, made every species in the chamber deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. Ambassador Lorith opened the session. The old diplomat's voice was heavier than usual, carrying the weight of guilt he had not been able to shake for 3 months. The Council formally condemns the Valkyrie Dominion's unprovoked invasion of Earth, Lorith said. We acknowledge that this Council bears responsibility for the vote that enabled the attack. We recognize the suffering caused, and we ask the delegation from Earth to present their terms. Their terms. The chamber tensed. This was the moment everyone feared. Humans could demand anything, reparations that would bankrupt entire civilizations. Territory, resources, military dominance over the Outer Rim, the complete dissolution of the Velkhari Dominion. Whatever they asked for, no one in the room had the power to refuse them. Shocke stepped to the podium. He looked out at the assembled species. Thousands of eyes, hundreds of body shapes, dozens of atmospheres, the entirety of galactic civilization staring at him. He was silent for a long time, long enough that representatives began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, long enough that the silence became its own kind of statement. Then he spoke. "We came to this galaxy 32 years ago. We came with open hands. We came hoping to find partners, allies, friends. We knew we were young. We knew we were small. But we believed that a community of civilizations would value peace over power." He paused. "We were wrong." The chamber was completely still. You looked at us and saw something primitive, something beneath you. And when the Velkhari asked for permission to destroy us, most of you said yes. Some of you said nothing, which is the same thing, and a few of you tried to warn them. We know who you are, and we have not forgotten. He glanced briefly at Counselor Fenn, who sat rigid in his seat, barely breathing. "We survived," Shocke continued, "as we always have. Humans have been surviving things that should have killed us since before we left our own planet. Ice ages, plagues, wars. We have beaten everything the universe has thrown at us, not because we are the strongest or the smartest, but because we refuse to stop. That is what you failed to understand about us. We do not give up, ever." He straightened his shoulders. "But we did not come here today to punish you." A ripple went through the chamber. Confusion, disbelief. Some representatives turned to each other, unsure if they had heard correctly. "We came here to make sure this never happens again, to anyone." Shocke presented his proposal. He called it the Sol Doctrine. It was simple. No species would be permitted to authorize or conduct military action against any civilization without a full and open tribunal where both sides could speak. Any species found guilty of unprovoked aggression would face a unified response from a coalition led by Earth's fleet. Humanity would serve as the galaxy's deterrent, not its ruler, not its conqueror, its guardian. The chamber erupted. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages. Some species were outraged at what they called human arrogance. Who were these creatures to appoint themselves protectors of the galaxy? Others were quietly relieved. The humans could have demanded an empire. Instead, they were offering a shield. Counselor Fenn was the first to stand in support. He walked to the center of the chamber, something he had never done before, and addressed every species present. "I warned you," Fenn said. His voice was no longer thin or shaky. It was hard. "I stood in this chamber and told you exactly what would happen if you provoked humanity. You did not listen. They won. They could demand anything. They could take your worlds, your resources, your freedom. Instead, they are offering to protect you." He looked around the room with open contempt. "If you are too proud to accept that, then you deserve whatever comes next." The debate lasted 6 hours. In the end, the vote was close, but the Sol Doctrine passed. Earth would lead a new coalition. The galaxy would have a guardian, whether it wanted one or not. After the vote, Warlord Drenax was brought into the chamber. He was in chains, his dark armor stripped, his rank badges removed. He was no longer a warlord. He was nothing. His empire had been placed under sanctions so severe that it would take generations to recover. Guards led him through the chamber toward the exit. As he passed the human delegation, Drenax stopped. He looked at Admiral Dohin. The Velkhari's 4 orange eyes searched the human's face for something. An explanation. A reason. Anything that would help him understand how his perfect armada had been broken by a species the galaxy considered insects. "What are you?" Drenax asked. His voice was hollow. Dohin looked at him. His expression did not change. His voice was quiet. "We are human." Drenek stared at him for a moment longer, then looked away. The guards led him out of the chamber. He did not look back. Later that evening, Do-hyun and Nari stood on the observation deck of the Baekho. The flagship was docked at the council station, and through the wide windows they could see the stars stretching out in every direction. Billions of them, each one a sun with planets and moons and civilizations that were now, whether they liked it or not, under Earth's protection. Nari leaned against the railing. She looked tired. For the first time in months, the sharp edge in her eyes had softened. She was not a tactical officer right now. She was just a person, looking at the stars. "Do you think they will ever accept us?" she asked. Do-hyun stood beside her with his hands behind his back. He thought about the question for a long time. He thought about the 95 ships lost in the first battle. The men and women who had flown burning vessels into enemy warships because they believed their sacrifice would matter. He thought about Bae Taewon, still recovering in a medical bay on Earth, who had driven his own ship into the belly of a dreadnought and somehow lived to tell the story. He thought about Kwon Soo-jin, who had built weapons that could erase matter from existence, and cried quietly in her lab after firing them. A small blue planet that had looked up at the stars and dared to believe it belonged among them. "They do not have to accept us," Do-hyun said finally. "They just have to remember what happens when they come for us." Nari smiled. It was a small, tired, real smile. The kind that only comes after you have been through something terrible and come out the other side still standing. She turned away from the window. "Take us home, Admiral." Do-hyun nodded. He tapped the communication panel on the wall. "Bridge. Set course for Earth." The Baekho's engines hummed to life. Outside the observation windows, the stars began to stretch into long lines of white light. The ship turned toward a quiet yellow star on the edge of the galaxy, a star that no species in the known universe would ever underestimate again. The Baekho jumped to hyperspace, and the galaxy, for the first time in a very long time, was quiet.